Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Fish My City, Taipei, Taiwan. Man, what a show. I tell you, I've had an amazing experience in this series traveling to really cool cities, both in the US and internationally. But Taipei, Taiwan blew me away. The people, the culture, the history, the food, and last but not least, the fishing in Taipei blew my mind. Totally blew my mind. Great experience. My 3 bucket list species in Taiwan were the African catfish, the Chinese sea bass, and the giant snakehead, also called toman. As a bonus, I got to catch a tilapia right in downtown Taipei. That was one of the prettiest fish I ever caught in my life. Let me talk to you a little bit about the bait, the tackle, the rods and reels that I used to catch those 3 bucket list species, in addition to a bonus, a tilapia. I want to start with African catfish. What a cool species. The best way I can describe an African catfish, it's almost half of it, the front half of it looks like a traditional catfish. The back half of it looks like a snakehead. One of the great things about an African catfish is it's a survivor. Even with low water or hardly any water, low oxygen, these things find a way to live and survive. And they're amazing fighting fish. We targeted the African catfish by utilizing 2 different techniques. One involved casting live bait and cut bait out into the deeper channel. The other one was casting artificial lures, surface lures, to catch some of them. I'll start with that one, and we used just what I call a crawling style lure. And this is just a generic surface style lure. It's got these metal wings on it, and it floats on the surface. We would cast these things, reel them slowly, so this thing would just kind of creep along the surface real slow. Made a lot of noise, and those smaller African catfish would come up and eat them. But the really big African catfish, and we had an opportunity to catch one, came on that cut bait on the bottom in the deeper water. And we used the simplest rig I know of, and I call it a Carolina rig. And all a Carolina rig is a hook, a length of leader to a barrel swivel, and a weight. And real simple system. I used a 2-aught VMC sport circle hook, and then I used a VMC barrel swivel with a little bead, and above that bead I used a 3/8 and ½ ounce VMC tungsten worm weight, just a regular weight like I'd use bass fishing. We'd put the bait on there, cast it out, let it sit. Those catfish would smell that bait. They'd come with their little barbels, their whiskers. They'd find it and they'd eat it up. For tackle for the African catfish, I kept it real simple. I used a heavy duty freshwater spinning rod. This is the Garcia Ike series 7/6 medium heavy spinning rod. I paired it with an Garcia 30 size reel, and I used 20-pound Berkeley braid, that new X5 stuff. It's unbelievable. As a leader, because I was a little worried about catching these big, really big African catfish, I stepped it up a little bit and went to 20-pound Berkeley 100% trilene fluorocarbon. I used that same combo for both the top water and the bait. African catfish, pretty amazing. The second species on the list was another one I had never caught before, and it's called a Chinese sea bass. These things migrate in from the East China Sea. They come up the river, and they stop, hold, and feed around bridge pilings. Listen to me. I don't care whatever city you live in, if there's bridge pilings, there's going to be fish around them. And these Chinese sea bass would get behind the pilings in the current eddies, So they didn't have to always fight that current. And they would look up and wait for stuff to wash past. Bait fish, crawfish, all that stuff would wash past, and they'd come up and eat it. For the Chinese sea bass, around those bridge pilings, I use 2 different baits to catch my fish. One is a deep diving jerkbait. This is a bait by Rapala, and if you look at it, it's got the bigger bill on it. It's a deeper diving jerkbait, and this is a really cool bait. I fished it in just a silverish blue, just a real good generic bait fish pattern. And you know, the great thing about this is the shadow wrap deep on about 15-pound tests, you can get it 8 to 10 foot deep. And that was so key when I was fishing around those pilings. I would cast past the piling, I'd reel up to it, and I would start those slow twitches. And we caught several nice Chinese sea bass on that bait. But the star, and I think because it could get a little deeper and I could jig it more toward the bottom, was a Rapala ripping wrap. That's that big number 7 in a really bright chartreuse color, a little bit of pearl in it, really stood out in that dirtier water, in that current. And I would cast this thing by those bridge pilings, I'd let it get down, and I'd rip it off the bottom, let it sink back down. Rip it off the bottom, let it sink back down. I lost a few baits getting them snagged, but that is the bait that caught a giant 15-pound class Chinese sea bass, fish of a lifetime. Rod and reel, I went with probably my favorite all-purpose casting rod out there. That's the Abu Garcia 7.4 medium heavy casting rod. I paired that with a Revo Ike in the 8-0-1, a faster retrieve, because in that heavy current, I wanted to be ability to set the hook, get them away from the pilings, and land the fish. With line, I went with straight 100% Berkeley trilene fluorocarbon in 20-pound. And that straight fluorocarbon was key because it let the bait get deeper and have better action. Amazing species. You know, the final bucket list species for me, and really, honestly, this was one of the reasons I wanted to go to Taiwan and Taipei so bad, was to catch this fish I've heard about from the States called a giant snakehead, or toman. And if you think of snakehead fishing, you know, snakeheads can get big here in the States, but the giant snakehead can get 20, 30, 40 pounds. These things get giant. The best way I can describe them is they're like giant hoagies. They're so thick. And here it goes. They eat topwaters. And it was one of the most amazing bites and fights of my life. I fished 2 separate baits for the giant snakehead, or the toman, and both of these lures stayed on top. One is a frog style bait. This is a bait by Mullix called a sneaky frog. And the nice thing about the frog is I could cast this anytime there were trees or overhanging bushes. I would cast this thing around and not get it snagged. The one thing I did on the retrieve is normally when I'm bass fishing with the Mullix sneaky frog, I walk it. I take my time and walk it. But for the giant toman, they wanted something fast. So I'd cast this thing out and I would basically just reel it in and jig it every once in a while, and it would stay on the top and just push water. Mullix sneaky frog in that perch color, caught a few of them, but the really big one I caught, I'm so excited about this, came on a popper. And if you've ever gotten a bite on a popper, especially from a fish that's in the 20-pound range, it's almost like a toilet bowl flushing around the bait. And this is one of my favorite topwaters when I'm trying to fish fast. This is a bait by Rapala. It's the Rapala ExPop. It's in a yellow perch pattern. It's got that bright orange head so the giant toman could find it. And the same thing with that frog. I didn't cast it out and twitch. I didn't fish it slow. I fished this extremely fast, almost reeling it straight back and every once in a while popping it. And when you reel this thing, it kind of pushes along the top. and then I'd throw a pop in and it would splash water out. And that was a trigger to get those fish to react on it. Both the frog and the Rapala ExPop I fished on the same combination. That's that Abu Garcia Ike Series 7.4 medium heavy casting rod. I used it on an Abu Garcia Revo Ike in an 8-0-1. And because these fish are giant and vicious, I fished straight braid. And I went with 50-pound Berkley X5 braid. I didn't want to take any chances hooking a fish of a lifetime and breaking them off, so I went straight braid. Last but not least, I get to catch some bonus fish when I visit these cities. And in Taipei, I had an opportunity to fish for a species we eat a lot here in the States called tilapia. But tilapia is the national fish of Taiwan, and they can get pretty big. I ended up catching one about 4 pounds on my favorite little swim bait. You keep seeing it in all the episodes. That's a 3-inch Berkley ripple shad, just a bait fish pattern with an 1/8 ounce VMC finesse jig head. I fished it on a spinning rod with 15-pound braid to an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. The rod was the 7-foot medium action Abu Garcia Ike spinning with the 20 size Abu Garcia Ike Revo spinning reel. Man, let me tell you, international cities, what an amazing experience. I'll never forget the experience of fishing in Taipei, Taiwan for 3 bucket list species. Hope you like the show. Keep your eye out for next week's episode. There's going to be more fish catches.